Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha George. I'm a battery engineer and the co-founder of SumEV. We are an electric micromobility company based right here in Somerville, Massachusetts. I'm so excited to be moderating this panel today because we're going to be discussing two of my very favorite topics to ponder on, which are failure and resilience. And I think 2020 has given us a lot of time to think about things when it comes to failure and resilience and how we can embrace it. Because sometimes when life gives you some lemons, like my background, you just have to make some lemonade. And today is actually the perfect day for some lemonade because it's like 75 in Boston, which I thought that we were done with the summer and that fall was here. But anyway, so before we get started, some quick logistical things. You're welcome to drop your Q&As in the chat box and I'll get to them if there's time. Anjali will be monitoring as well. We're gonna have 4 presenters today, each presenting for 5 minutes, followed by about 5 minutes of Q&A. And then after we wrap up all 4 presenters, if there's time, we'll do a final round of Q&A as well. I also have some polling questions that I'll be dropping in as well, so stay tuned for those. And without further ado, I'm thrilled to announce our first presenter. It is Deepak Shenoy. Deepak is the head of engineering at ConnectRN, where he is helping scale its early stage startup engineering organization for its next phase of growth. He's a startup veteran and has spent the last decade in the startup world where he's helped many early stage companies build their products and teams from scratch and take it from concept to launch. Take it away, Deepak.
Thank you, Natasha. Let me share my screen. Can you guys see my screen, my slides?
Yep, we can see them.
All right. Welcome everybody to Startup Boston. Hope you guys are having a great time. The topic that I've chosen to discuss today is about creating a culture of quality. Now, why is this important? So, you know, our theme today is making lemonade out of lemons. One of the things I've noticed as being a part of startups is that you are really working in a very constrained environments. You know, you have a tiny QA team, your tiny development team. Essentially, your entire company is really, really small. So why not take advantage of that small size and make lemonade out of it, right? And so one way you can do it is building a culture of quality. The culture of quality is based on a premise that there is no single tool, test, or person that can guarantee quality, right? It's a company-wide effort. And the advantage of being in a really small company is that you can involve the entire company in doing this. It's a common myth among people that the responsibility of quality is just it just depends upon the quality assurance team within the company, but you know, that's not actually true. It really is a responsibility of the entire company. So let me talk about the whys. For example, why do you need to build a culture quality, right? Besides the obvious reason, right? You know, because if you don't build a quality product, your company is going to fail. But there are other main reasons. There are 3 important reasons why you want to build a culture of quality. First is, you know, even though you're working in a very small teams, you're always collaborating with different teams, right? You have the sales, marketing, customer support. There are various teams within your organizations that you may not deal with on a daily basis. So this actually building a culture of quality process might actually open up different venues for collaboration, right? If you organize, let's say, a team session where you're bringing everybody together to start a quality session where you are testing your product, then you're opening up channels of collaboration. Second thing is you're reinforcing the fact that you're all marching towards the same goal, which is the shared understanding of importance of quality, right? You are reinforcing that over and over again. And the third thing is when you have done with the whole process, right? The expectation is that the quality of the product goes up. And when the quality product goes up, you are actually increasing the cohesion of your team, which results in increased morale. And, you know, in a normal non-COVID situation, you would give high fives and you would be, you know, having this sense of camaraderie. You know, even in this COVID era, you can still get the same results, right? Second thing I wanted to talk about who is actually involved in this, essentially the entire company, but these are the four cohorts, if you will, who should be involved in this building the culture of quality process. The product team, of course, which includes the product managers, designers, developers, and QA. Obviously, they are always part of building the product, but having them involved in trying to sort of onboard the rest of the company into this quality process is also very important. Sales and marketing, because sales and marketing are directly in contact with your customers, so having them exposed to this process is also really helpful. Now, the third cohort is the executives. And this is very interesting because usually executives are at a way higher level where they are more involved with the business side of things. But having them getting involved in the process is really important. And sometimes they volunteer their time to help test out these products, because what it does is it gives them a sense of feeling that they are part of the journey of building the product rather than just selling the product, right? So executives play a very important role in this process as well. And finally, tech support. Tech support is, these people are very involved with the product to begin with. Now being a part of, increasing the quality and being part of the group testing session just raises the bar a little bit more for them. So how do you go about doing this? Right? You can do it. You cannot just simply drop it on the floor and have people get on with it, right? You have to do a thoughtful change management. What that means is just firing up an email to people, letting them know that this is coming and how you're going to do it and why you are doing it. Second thing you do is onboarding, because sometimes you need to have specialized apps, tools, all these different ways you can actually test your product. So onboarding is really important so that people feel connected to the system. Third is you assign roles and responsibilities of who does what, because the product and the development team are obviously involved. In my past company, the UX designer would just go around the table just seeing how people are actually using the app. And that's one of the role and responsibilities. Some of the roles and responsibilities might be people entering stories into Jira and trying to keep track of all the things that have been discovered during this session. And finally, just because you're involving the entire company, you should make it very rewarding and fulfilling, which means always get food involved so that everybody is involved in the process. Have special rewards for people finding the craziest bugs or the most number of bugs and things like that. So get the team really involved in the whole process, and so that's going to help you build the culture of quality even better. And that's what I had. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Deepak. That was really insightful. We'll be taking some questions now, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that you mentioned. So you talked about the culture of quality and how it's a company-wide effort. So at a startup, when everyone's kind of moving really quickly and in many different directions, how do you sort of check in with each other about the failures or the kind of difficulties different members of the team might be experiencing, and how can you sort of band together in this like company-wide effort to power forward? Because I think some of that might get lost, especially in startups, right, where things are a bit crazy.
Yeah, so what I would do is typically time is very important because everybody is doing several different things at the same time and moving really fast. I try to time it so that the group testing sessions happen during just before a release or a time when things are not really crazy, right? It's very important to understand that there are other things going on within the company and to manage the expectations of what you are expecting out of it, and trying to explain why we are doing it in the first place, right? It is very important to explain to people why a culture of quality is so important, because in the end, we are all marching towards the same goal of building a quality product and trying to prevent failure that way, right? So that would be my approach of doing it.
That's awesome. And I think you also talked about thoughtful change management. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, and how that might pertain to, is that talking about situations where something might not be working in the company and you actually come together and implement changes?
Yeah, so what I was talking about is change is always difficult, right? When you are introducing a new process, for example, now you're trying to build a culture of quality. Now, some of the people in your team might have come from larger organizations where this is not possible, because this is, as I mentioned, this you're trying to make a lemonade out of lemons, because one of the advantages that a startup organization have is a very, very small team. So you can bring the entire company together, accumulate around in a boardroom or around the kitchen table and get everybody involved in the testing of the product, right? So what I mean by change management is that when you're introducing any new process, you cannot just drop it into people's lap and say, expect them to just get on board with it, right? It's about getting the buy-in from your entire company. You have to explain why. So the first thing is you don't accumulate everybody around the kitchen table. You want them to understand what they're going to be doing, why they are doing, and have that buy-in. So the change management is about that, essentially to get the buy-in from the people, explaining them the whys and whos and hows, and so that they really understand when they do come to these sessions, they're well prepared.
That makes sense. Yeah. Kind of making sure everyone knows the company culture from the beginning. That way, when things happen, you bring people to the table and people know what to expect.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Deepak. That was really helpful. And I'm sure we'll get some questions at the end as well. Okay, so on to our next speaker. I'm thrilled to announce it's going to be Greg Schell. Greg is a managing director at Bain Capital and co-leads the Double Impact Fund. Before coming to Bain Capital, he was a portfolio manager at GMO, working on the US sleeve of the Global Focused Equity Fund. And before coming to GMO, Greg was a senior equity analyst at Columbia Management. And previously to that, he was a consultant at Bain & Co. in both the strategy and private equity practice. All right, Greg, take it away.
I have to remember to take myself off of mute. Natasha, thank you. Welcome everyone to Startup Boston. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It was interesting to consider this topic because as an investment professional, I've spent much of the last 2 decades sort of investing in businesses, supporting, companies of many kinds, including startups. And so, the idea that I would come after almost 20 years of a public equity career and really transition to a private equity career put me all of a sudden on the other side of the table. I was the startup and I was the entrepreneur. I was raising money really the first time in my career and having to tell a story much in the way that, entrepreneurs always must. And so it's an interesting change of headset for me. And I would tell you that in many ways it brought on, to complement what Deepak was saying, a culture of adaptability. As many of you would know, this fund that we started was the first social impact private equity strategy, really started by a major institutional, grade investment firm. And so we were coming to market telling a story of a private equity firm investing in many ways in a different way than most normally would. We were investing along what we thought were secular trend growth opportunities, namely in healthcare, in energy efficiency and climate, sort of remediation, and education and workforce development. And yet what people heard from us was that we were sacrificing returns in exchange for a social good. And we tried to make the argument over and over that we saw no need to sacrifice our return profile. In fact, we thought that these areas would be of increasing importance to the economy writ large. So it was very humbling over, literally hundreds of unique meetings to tell our story and to really try to engender support. And I talk about the culture of adaptability because it is my sense that, coming out with an entrepreneurial venture is a highly personal pursuit. When somebody doesn't give you, a sort of opportunity, to make a sale or doesn't fund your venture, it seems like an indictment on everything that you are and have been and all that prepared you for this moment. But to the extent that you can stave off those kinds of feelings, you get a chance to really see the feedback as vital feedstock to adapt your venture. And so in that way, as fixed as you might be on your vision and on your end goal, it's probably never appropriate to be dogmatic about the road that you take to get there. And so all that incredible feedback allows you to, hire in a different way, or, make your pitches in a different way, or frankly, do things differently, where you get a chance to go northeast at a time when you for sure thought the right road to take was southwest. And I think that level of humility is important for all entrepreneurs to have. And that was something that we needed. So the early feedback that we got in this venture, as sometimes difficult as it was to take, there are a lot of nights where you go to bed thinking, what did I do? I gave up a very senior position in a career that I loved in order to pursue a dream. And so there are nights when you go to bed thinking, did I do the right thing? It's important to wake up in the morning and say, absolutely, I did do the right thing. And not only that, but to re-underwrite the fact that the vision that you have does have merit, but the ways in which you acquit that vision and try to put yourself in a position to succeed, you need to be able to have those vary, frankly, and to be able to say to yourself, no small business has yet earned the right to say that this is the only path they could take to greatness. You will grow in many ways based on your ability to lead customers to where you think they ought to be, and them leading you for where they are now or where they think they ought to be. And so that dynamic tension is something that I think entrepreneurs would do well to take stock of, and and to utilize the feedback in a vital way. The last thing that I would say is, in many ways, and it's sort of homage to our title here, I would say that look, the adage that how to make put lemons into lemonade. It's an interesting adage, but another way to look at it is to say it's exactly the opposite. Lemons are a precondition for lemonade. They're the most vital ingredient, actually. And so if you don't allow yourself to accept what it means to make a mistake or go in a wrong direction and adapt and course correct over time, you'll likely curtail the success that you could have. Whereas if you're able to metabolize that feedback and turn it around into more productive uses of time, energy, and capital, you'll likely put yourself in a position where you can increase the odds of a successful outcome.
Thanks so much, Greg. Yeah, so many great points there about resilience and the journey of the entrepreneurial journey, and how I always like to think of it in this way of like, there is a blueprint for success in some ways, but there's no blueprint for greatness. And like you said, it's this, you have to kind of wake yourself up every day that you might have a bad day, to wake up and say, I can do it. This venture is worth going after. And on that note, I mean, do you think that some of
Sorry
this
about that. I was timing myself.
Oh, no worries. No, you're great. You crushed it. Do you feel like that it's practice almost? It's like muscle memory, like practicing resilience and getting used to failure? Like, is it just throwing yourself in these situations and actually exercising that muscle? Or do you think some people are just born naturally okay with failure and just jumping right back in?
You know what? I think actually, I'll surprise you maybe by saying I think it actually is something that all successful people know, and have had to practice 1,000 times, right? For you to be in a position to have a startup and to be credible with a vision, you've had to do exactly what I described many times. The interesting thing is that when you're in position to commandeer a set of resources from capital, to ask other people to have given up careers that they loved and were successful at to join you, you kind of have a headset where you always have to be right, not just always being on, but always have to be right. And a lot of times it will feel inappropriate, to be in front of an investment, in an investment context and say, actually, you know what? That was a really interesting question. I don't know the answer. It seems more right to almost feign some level of certitude. And that tension, of course you want to be well prepared, but I'd never, be afraid to offer some real humility that says, I don't know that I've tested that, but here's my point of view, or my hypothesis suggests this to me, but not feel like I have to have a world-beating answer for every question. It's likely the case that, if the question were so easy or the issue were so easy, someone would have done it already. And so by, taking on the pioneer's burden that most startups do, along with that should come some humility that says, we're tackling something really hard. The benefits of our success are really big and consequential. But, we have an approach now that, we've come to, not randomly. There's data and there's research and there's analysis. But we're open to be compelled by something that came along. You'd have to work hard to compel me, because chances are with your question, you've not done the work that I've done to have the point of view that I have. But to the extent that you earn that right to give me counsel, I have maximum humility to take it. And even so much to say that you can change my mind about some decisions I made. I think everyone in a position of leading an organization has to have that combination of real conviction, but humility, based on new facts.
Yeah, it's I think striking a balance maybe between the two, and knowing when to have that humility, but also knowing when to stand by your decisions. I think that also takes practice as well. And I think it's almost like when you're in that position of being questioned and kind of like you have to come up with these answers, it's hard to sort of step back into that position of like, actually, wait, I actually don't know the answer to this, or I haven't tested it this way. And I think as founders, we might struggle with that because we're sort of backed up against a wall. We might need to raise a round. We might need to, we have employees waiting for their paychecks. Like it's a stressful position to be in.
Yeah.
Do you have any like reminders to founders who might be in that position, but remembering that investors and VCs and people giving you money are also humans, and they understand what that humility is like? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, I think there was a CEO of a Fortune 10 company who told the following story. Be quick, but he said, to a really pointed question in front of an investment audience, he said, "Look, I'm an old salesman. Every night I go to bed, ruing over all the sales that I didn't make. I'm really particularly hard on myself. But every morning I look in the mirror, like every salesman or saleswoman ought to, and I look at myself and I say one thing: hello, handsome." And that always sort of made an impression on me, because there's a certain optimism that you must have about your ability to take on a big challenge and solve it. The conviction, is paired really with a sense that, tomorrow can be, better if I do these things. And I think as entrepreneurs, you have to have almost a zealot's level of optimism that you can change the world. And without that, you're toast. The failure rate is too high. But when you wake up knowing, inside your soul that you are meant to be doing the thing that you're doing, and you're not going to allow any obstacle to get in your way, that real deep, convicted sense of optimism is something that I find is the thing that sells other people more than sort of the X's and O's. It's what gets the talented engineer to want to join you. It's what gets the investor to want to make a bet on you. That you feel deeply convicted because of your optimism that you can solve a challenge. And I think that's the one thing that you need, as a successful venture. And I think we had that. No matter how many people told us no, that they were not going to fund our venture or give us capital, we knew that we had something. And so no matter how difficult it was to face feedback, with the adaptability, with the humility, we were able to course correct. But never sacrificed our vision. We had deep optimism that what we were onto was something that people would eventually come around to. And I think since that time, it's only been 5 years, the world is speaking an impact ethos in a whole different way. And we have a little tiny piece, of the reason why that's true.
Yeah, wow. I'm feeling very inspired. It's it's been a tough year, and I think hearing this is kind of like reinforcing the reasons why many founders, and I'm sure a lot of the attendees who might be founders, started their companies. It's that innate kind of feeling that that this might change the world, and convincing people of that vision. Some people are really good at, like Elon Musk. I've heard, I have a friend who works at SpaceX, and he says he just sells you so deeply on the vision that you're like, I'm willing to work 7 days a week for you. Anyway, okay, so I think, do we have any questions? I think we can. One of the questions that we got was, and we might save this for the end, actually. Let's move on for now. But thank you, Greg. That was really inspiring, and Deepak as well. We're only halfway there, so I'm excited to hear from the remaining 2 panelists. Next up, we have Josh Aviv. Josh is the founder and CEO of SparkCharge, a company specializing in portable electric vehicle chargers. He launched the startup at Syracuse University, and since graduation has become a dynamic figure in the clean tech community. Fun fact, Josh and I are incubating at Greentown Labs together right here in Somerville, Mass. And take it away, Josh.
Awesome. So thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be on the call here today and talk with everyone about taking lemons and making lemonade. Really, I have 4 key points that I'm going to go through, in the short 5 minutes that I have here, learning, things that I've learned over the course of my journey that I think other people should know along the way. Number one is, which is probably no surprise to anyone on this Zoom call, which is that everyone fails, right? Failure is a part of life. When we think about failure, especially in my case, being a startup founder, my background was always in sports, right? So I played sports, I did football, I did boxing, I did rugby. And, it's something that gets ingrained in you from a very early time when you start playing sports, is that failure is not an option, right? You do everything you can to not fail. You run through a brick wall to not fail. You try your hardest to not fail. And I remember, that was the mentality that I took very early on coming into a startup and starting a company was, we will not fail under any circumstances whatsoever. And within like the first 5 minutes, you realize that that's not how things work in a startup environment, right? Failure is a part of learning. Failure is a part of the growth of your team. It's a part of the growth of you as a leader. And that was something that I think a lot of startup entrepreneurs, there's a lot of new startup entrepreneurs really, didn't understand or didn't grasp. And it's something that when I talk to a lot of new entrepreneurs, the number one thing I always hear is, I can get this thing up and running in 3 months. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when I said that. I gave myself some wiggle room. I said 6 months, right? Right. So, and I think that's because no one really anticipates, no one builds in for failure. And that is one of the biggest points that anyone can really add in. And I know that, a lot of entrepreneurs, when they think about failure, it's kind of like this, this dark space where they're like, no, I don't want to fail. I have the backing of a venture capitalist. I have the backing of a really good team. Why isn't it working? Why isn't it coming together? And I think it's something that, the more we learn to cope with, the more we learn to accept, the more we learn to be comfortable with failure, the better entrepreneurs that we will become, the better people that we will be. And I think the better returns that VCs will get on their investments, right? One of the things that I always, remember with one of our very first venture capitalists here in Boston, actually, Point Judith Capital. I remember when I was, talking with them and we were doing diligence, the partner at the time, he was like, you've got in your projections that, you're going to beat a market in a year. And I remember, so steadfast. Absolutely. We'll be there in a year. There's no way we don't make it. And he's just like, yeah, that's cool. He goes, but I'm going to add 20% on top of that. I think you're going to be there in about 1.5 to 2 years. And I go, oh man, we're going to beat that expectation, and, sure enough, I think it's like 3 years later. Right. So it's just a part of life. And I think new entrepreneurs need to take that to heart. Everyone fails. Point number 2 is to have patience. This is something that I think really goes, not noticed in the entrepreneurial community. I think this is something that entrepreneurs could learn from at a very early stage all the way to late stage. Things are going to take longer than what you expect, and you need to have patience. And I think that goes, not only to the team that you're working with, but also to the product that you're building, right? When it comes to the team, I think a lot of things, it's like everybody has to hit their deadline, everybody has to be on time, everything has to work. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs where they miss, where they have a really big gap is have patience with your team, right? Life is going to get in the way. Things are going to pop up. You're going to put out 1 million fires every week. You're going to put out fires sometimes that, you create yourself. You're going to put out fires that other people create. And then sometimes you're going to have to put out fires that the world creates, right? I had, this is a really funny story, but, I remember talking with a potential customer overseas, and he sent us a purchase order with the caveat of who won our election in November, right? Whether or not the purchase order would go through, depending on who won. I won't say who he was rooting for, but, you have to put out these fires sometimes that you never see coming your way. And I think the more patience you have and the more acceptance that you have with your team, with the outside factors, with the things you can't control, the better off that you will be and the better entrepreneur that you can become. The third thing is to learn from failure. I think it's just a huge travesty for someone to fail and not learn from that failure, to not get better, to not improve. One of the things that I had to really improve upon was I am extremely hard on myself, right? If my team fails, that's one thing, but if I feel as though I have failed or I have failed them, it is something that I just wrestle with day in and day out. I am, as much as no one's perfect, I just hate failure. But one of the things that you learn from that is not only learning from failure, but learning to get better from failure. What went wrong? How can I improve? And getting to the core issue. You know, it's one of the things, you know, our VP of marketing, Josh Raposa, does a really good job. You know, every time there's a fire that we put out, it's why did this fire arise and how did we go about putting it out? What is the why? What is the cause? And how can we get better? And what can we do next time a similar situation pops up? And I think as long as entrepreneurs maintain that mindset, as long as they maintain that mindset of, I need to learn from these failures, I need to learn from these instances, then they will get better. And then the fourth and final thing is pass on that learnings to your team. Pass on that learnings to your family. Pass on that learnings to your ecosystem. One of the worst things I think you can do is not spread the learnings that we have, right? So like Greg and Deepak, you guys gave really good stories. And I think that's one of the things that Startup Boston, specifically this talk, is really about, is passing on that teaching of failure, passing on that knowledge. I think the worst thing you can do is hold it in and not let others learn from your experience. You know, and I think that goes to another word that we love to use at Spark Charge, which is transparency. Right? You know, we have our stand-up meetings where people talk about what they accomplished in a given week, what they didn't get done in a given week, and how they plan to move forward. But, you know, allowing people to fail, allowing people to be open about their failures, accepting those failures with the expectation that they will learn from those failures, allows for transparency. And I think when you add transparency into that, you allow people to grow, you allow people to get better, and you allow people to improve. And once you do that, your team gets better, you move faster, and you have less instances where failure takes place. And so, you know, those are the couple of, you know, 4 key points that, you know, when we talk about taking lemons and turning them into lemonade, it's learning from our failures, accepting that everyone fails, having patience and passing on that knowledge so that others can grow with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Josh. So much there that I resonate with, being hard on yourself. I think that's definitely this entrepreneur thing where it's like, yeah, your team fails, but you fail. It's just, it eats away at me sometimes, and just sort of embracing that and running, you know, head first again the next day is so important. I love one of the things you said about, you know, sort of bringing your investors in on board and kind of having them be advisors in some way about the things you can expect in terms of timelines and things like that. But I think as founders, it can be hard sometimes to be honest with your investors about the kinds of lemons you have going on in the company. And what, in your experience, what's the best way to handle that? Do you go like be super transparent? Do you wait until there's a certain amount of time that's passed that you're like, okay, I think this is a good time? And what advice do you have for other people that might be in this situation?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it starts before the failure happens, right? You know, when it comes to, specifically when it comes to investors, it starts before the failure happens. One of the, actually, you know, another partner at PJC, I remember he was like, you know, you passed the airport test. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to invest in your startup. I remember I was like, well, what's the airport test? He goes, you know, when we were meeting with you and we were doing all this due diligence, he goes, we constantly asked ourselves, you know, if it was me and you stuck in an airport for an hour by ourselves, could we tolerate it, right? Do we actually like being around this person? And I remember I took that to heart and I applied that to all the investors that we would go out and meet, right? Is this somebody I want to work with? And I think that applies to your initial question of, you know, how do you get comfortable talking to your investors about failure? Well, it really starts when you're building that relationship with them. Right? When we go out and we talk to an investor, you know, from meeting number 1, when we're going over our pitch deck and everything's going forward, we always say, you know, look, we're all about transparency. We're going to be open and honest with you. We want you to be open and honest with us. And then the second thing is most of our investors, especially from our pre-seed to our seed, they're all considered mentors, right? They're all people, they text day and night, some of them way too late at night. They're very, you know, open and honest, and we maintain that dialogue so that when these fires do pop up, it's not oh, this is Josh reaching out, you know, once in a blue moon. It's okay, I talked to him last week, you know, we have that dialogue going on. A lot of our early stage investors, I really consider mentors. I consider them people that we can learn from as a team, that I can learn from as an entrepreneur. And we brought them on board because we thought they were going to make us better. They were going to make me a better entrepreneur, make me a better leader, and we lean on them for that. And so keeping that communication and that transparency open allows when those fires to pop up, it's an easier conversation.
That's such a good point. The investor entrepreneur fit is so important, especially in these scenarios. So starting that early on is so helpful. So a couple of questions from the audience. So the first one is, no one wants to fail, in particular startups receiving external investments. Should startups focus more on mitigating risks for failures instead?
I'm not sure if you, I mean, is this for me or the entire panel?
I think it's for you right now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not, you can mitigate risk as much as you want, right? And I'll give a really, we're in the clean tech space, right? And we have bill of materials, we have supply chain engineers, we have system engineers. Everything's supposed to, just go in an orderly fashion right down the line to a product being shipped out the door. But as much as you mitigate, as much as you plan for it, something can go wrong. Someone can input the wrong part number, and then now you've got 91 parts instead of 90. Your button manufacturer can run out of rubber. We had a connector guy run out of copper, right? Like, how? Right? Like, and so I think mitigation, I wouldn't use the word mitigate, but I would just use the word plan. You can plan and plan and plan and plan and plan, and you can go into battle with that plan, but just realize that things are going to change. And I think it was, a really good quote that kind of goes into this. I think Mike Tyson had a really good quote, and it's not very often you quote Mike Tyson, but he had a really good quote, and he said, everybody's got a game plan until they get punched in the face, right? Like, you hop in that ring, you put your team together, you go out there, you try to accomplish it, and you're going to get punched in the face. But it's not until you get punched in the face that you realize that maybe you need to adjust your plan or figure out a new plan.
So true. I actually used to box, and yeah, you actually don't really have a plan until you do get punched in the face. It's a very true thing. I guess one last question before we move on to Rachel, for you, Josh. How do you deal with or mitigate product market fit failures for hardware products, and how is this different compared to software product failures? This is from the audience.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. I'd say you really have to be flexible, but not too flexible when it comes to hardware, right? So when SparkCharge first started, I started SparkCharge in my dorm at Syracuse University. The original idea was and this was back in 2014, so the EV market was kind of like very early. But my original idea was to basically make these charging stations that were small, that would go in the ground, and you would put them at rest stops every 40 miles along the New York State Thruway. And I remember going out and getting, talking to the state and talking to the Thruway, and basically, they pretty much came back and said electric vehicles will never take off. It's just a fad that will blow over in a couple of years, right? And we had to make a decision, right? Do we want to continue doing things the way that we are, or do we want to pivot and make a change to our product? And we looked at the market as a whole, and we realized that the way the market was going about charging electric vehicles wasn't the most efficient. It wasn't the greatest way. Why couldn't an electric vehicle be charged anytime and anywhere they want with a portable charging station? And we pivoted, and we took that, and now we've had a lot of success with it. And obviously, electric vehicles are not a fad, and they're everywhere now, and they're growing, and they're great. But it's extremely hard to find that product market fit. You almost have to be at least maybe a year or two early in the development of your product before the market's ready for it, for you to capitalize on it. And you need to find investors and a team that says, hey, by the time we build this product, the market will be ready, right? And you need to basically convey that to your investors, convey that to those organizations, convey that to your customers sometimes. When it comes to software, one of the things that we found, we just added a really nice software element to our product. But one of the things that we realized with that was that it was just so much easier to play around with software. And that's not to say that software companies aren't hard, but hardware is hard for a reason. It is so much harder to pivot with hardware from our experience than it is to pivot with software.
Yeah, with supply chain issues and so many other factors in play, I think that's why investors even find it's hard to find hardware investors for that reason. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. That was really helpful from an entrepreneur's perspective. And now I'm super excited to announce Rachel Braun-Schurl. Rachel is a marketing strategist, business builder, and vagipreneur. With her focus on business from menstruation through menopause, Rachel works with large and small companies that offer products and services for female sexual health, reproductive health, and women's wellness solutions. Rachel spends a great deal of time talking publicly, loudly, and passionately in an effort to drive the conversation around the business of female health. So excited to hear you speak, Rachel. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I've been smiling for the last 10 minutes or so because in the chat, one of the folks wrote, "No pressure, Rachel, good story from the others." And all I could think, good stories from the others, and all I could think about is it's sort of like you don't want to be the last surgery before the surgeon's leaving for dinner kind of thing. So, you know, as you might expect, you have to prepare for the unexpected because some of my points were already taken, but I am going to be nimble like an entrepreneur. My focus is in the area of female sexual and reproductive health. So you already start with a challenge in that most people never want to hear or say or invest in words like vagina and orgasm, and yet if that's what your business is around, that's what you have to raise money around. And I reference what Greg said about storytelling, because so much to me of being an entrepreneur is about storytelling and ultimately sales. And how do you sell your story so that people are interested in investing in it? So I wanted to share an anecdote about a fundraising experience that sort of combines all the things that we've been talking about. I was raising money for my first venture in this space, which was a product that had a patented blend of botanical oils and extracts that was clinically proven to increase arousal, desire, and satisfaction for women. Sounds good. We had a clinically proven product with no drug-drug interactions. There wasn't a lot of conversation in the space. There had been 35 active clinical programs down to 2. Women weren't speaking to their partners or sisters or certainly mothers about this. One of the few spaces I've ever worked in, and I've worked in women's businesses my whole career, where there wasn't a natural place to have the conversation. So from a marketing perspective, it was like a perfect storm. So we march in with my business partner of 20 years. We've been partners. We built a marketing strategy firm and then pivoted to doing this particular venture that I'm talking about fundraising for, and stay to this day in that space working on driving top line growth. So, you know, we're consultants, we're strategists, we do presentations in our sleep. So we have 13 meetings in 2 days, and this is during the economic downturn, the last economic downturn, when the bottom is falling out of the financial markets. Lehman Brothers is going bankrupt. You know, the world is falling apart. People are losing jobs. Companies are going bankrupt every day. And here 2 middle-aged, now more middle-aged women, coming to talk to about a business with vaginas. So one of the things for those of you who either are investors or have met investors or have not had the experience of doing either, from my perspective as an entrepreneur, when you go into that many meetings in that short a period of time, they start to blur. You know, it almost looks like they move the office furniture from one office to the next. It seems like the same perky person is welcoming you at the front. They all have different investment theses, but they start to blend. So I just want to sort of set the stage for sort of this speed dating. So we go into the first meeting, and the first question we get asked is, how is this different than Viagra? And we have our answer. We understand the category, we understand the science, and we explain how female sexual response is much more complicated, and it's a combination of physiological, psychological, social, emotional, behavioral, and contextual responses, whereas male sexual response is much more like a hydraulic pump, and you need the blood flow to increase to pump up the pump, and then it works. So physiologically and emotionally, it's a much easier problem to solve. Okay, so normally when you're meeting with an investor, the objective is to get to the next meeting and have someone interested enough to ask you the strategic questions. You know, what is your growth plan? What's your strategy? When do you think you'll exit? Who are some potential strategic partners? And I thought the worst thing that could happen was silence, but it turns out that the worst thing that could happen is people giggling and whispering their tales of their sexual exploits from their senior prom in a voice loud enough that we could hear. And we literally felt like we were being punked half the time. Like, how could this be? We've been working for 20 years. We were in Silicon Valley. I had gone to business school out there. So lots of people who are running these funds were my classmates. Okay, Nothing. Laughing. I felt like I was in a 7th grade locker room, and then I felt like that might have been insulting to 7th graders who probably were more mature than that. So we go into the next meeting, and the first question we get is, what does your study say about satisfaction for the male? And our study was a 13-site, double-blind, placebo-controlled study, a pharmaceutical design of a study so that you could indicate that the results that people were experiencing were actually related to the product as opposed to a placebo effect. So we start to explain that the way the product worked, that the vaginal tissue was easier to penetrate, and that it did not work the same way for the penile tissue. And we saw increases in satisfaction from the male perspective. It was really much more from the perspective of, anecdotally, maybe he felt like a better partner, maybe he was happy that his partner was happy, and the study happened to have been done with heterosexual couples in long-term relationships. So again, we're waiting, we want to answer the questions, we have a growth strategy, we know how we're investing the money, the uses of the capital that we're trying to raise, and we still get the laughs and the giggles, and we're getting nowhere. And we had 11 more meetings at this point, so we're a couple hours into the day. My business partner and I walk out, and something made me look at my wallet. And the reason this is relevant is because I'm a credit card person. I track everything. I could tell you what I spent on groceries of any month in any year for the past 2 decades. Not that anybody cares, but I can. So it's meaningful that I never have cash. I look in my wallet for some reason, and I see a $100 bill. And it was either divine intervention or dumb luck, but it gave us this idea. So we huddle, we said, we have 11 more meetings. This isn't working. At the rate we're going, we're not gonna leave with any money. We're not gonna leave with 25 cents. So let's try something different. So we walk into the 3rd meeting already, and I have a $100 bill in my hand, and I smack it on the table, and I loudly, and I pause. If anyone asks us a question about the category that we can't answer, this $100 is yours. If anyone says a sexual joke that we haven't heard before since we've been in this business, the $100 is yours. If someone says something that makes us blush, this $100 is yours. Then I pause again, and I said, she likes it more, she wants to have it more, let's talk about the business model. And what that served to do is give us control of the story. So we put it out there. We get that people are embarrassed talking about this. We get that this isn't a topic that you usually talk about, but we wanted to communicate that we were serious people with a serious business that could make them serious money. And I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Orgasmic Leadership, Profiting from the Coming Surge in Women's Sexual Health and Wellness. And at looking back, that was the moment that I would describe I became an orgasmic leader, in the sense that I knew what the conversation was. I knew the tone that I wanted to take to talk about it. It wasn't the tone I had gone into those meetings with. And going back to the storytelling and sales that the other panelists have mentioned, you have to know how to change your story to get the result that you're trying to get in a way that's authentic. And there was nothing inaccurate or dishonest about what we said, but we also did signal to the investors that we were ready for business, and we weren't taking this as a joke. And if they wanted to giggle, bring it on. And ultimately, we raised, many, many millions of dollars and grew the business. But that always has stood in my mind as an example of how to change the dynamic, how to control the conversation, how to be able to get to your objective, which at that point was to raise capital. And we faced those challenges over and over again. We raised capital, fabulous. We have this great product, fabulous. We went to 100 media outlets, cable network, website, radio, and 95% said no. So again, we had to figure out how to tell a compelling story, which was so often inhibited by the fact that this is a category that, for many, many reasons, many folks in society have difficulty with, either religious backgrounds or upbringing or what they feel is appropriate. It doesn't matter what the reason is. But if you're running a business in this space, you have to figure out a way to get your message across. And with the difficulty in getting access to buying media, we couldn't buy real estate. We turned that into a business strategy, and we said, if we can't buy media, we're going to earn it. And we set out on a path to build the business through public relations. And we went through 3 agencies before we found the one that we wanted. And once we launched this campaign about the disparity between men and women's advertising, it appeared in the New York Times on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, it was in Good Morning America and The View. The following Tuesday, we did an 8-minute segment on ABC News, and we were off to the races with a very different story than the one that I thought would be, but it was ultimately the one that catalyzed the business.
That's so inspiring, Rachel. And I think that so many people here in the chat are even saying, someone's asking if you're hiring.
Sure, send me your resume. I always am interested in smart people who find this space tantalizing.
Yeah, it's almost like I think it's really hard when you're in that situation and you're against this wall. You've gone to these meetings, they're going nowhere, to kind of like have the grit to just really dig deep and be like, okay, cool, I see this $100 bill. What can, like, this opportunity, how do I make literally lemonade out of this situation I'm in? And to have the kind of mindset to be able to do that, I guess, would you say that that's generally been your attitude, or do you think that this is just something since that moment you've developed over time?
No, I've always been the type to run into a brick wall. Growing up, we watched every sports movie, every training movie, every come from behind, you can do it, Rudy. When my kids wanted to watch the first, in the new series of the Rocky Balboa movies, I said, no, I'm a purist. You watch 1, you go through 5, then you can watch anything else after that. But I wasn't nearly as accomplished as Greg, but I was always competing in sports and other things. And I like the idea of winning, and it feels much better than losing. And so it's always sort of been, I see a problem, I'm going to attack it. And when that doesn't work, if there's a wall, I'm going to go under it, around it, next to it. And my husband uses the word relentless, which I'm not always sure he means as a compliment, but it does describe, how I generally approach problems.
That's so great. Let me see. I think there might be a couple other questions here. I have dropped a poll question to the attendees. It's when I encounter a roadblock or failure, it affects my morale and takes me a while to bounce back. Just wanted to see what the general consensus here is, or if people have thoughts on that, because in some ways I do think that there are some people who are like you, who just find the good in everything, or are able to come up with solutions. And I think that there's some people like that, and some people actually build towards that skill, and it's building that resilience and grit as you experience things.
But I want to be very clear. That doesn't mean that I haven't failed. I failed many times. I probably failed 10 times today. And I will say that one of the misnomers, I think, is that failure is just great. You hear about investors who won't invest in somebody who hasn't failed already. From my perspective, failure hurts. It's like a punch in the gut. And, I don't want to leave the impression that someone punches me in the face like Mike Tyson, and I said, well, that didn't hurt, I'm going to go on. You have to sort of mend your bruises and regather your resources and figure out what reserves you have. Failure is hard, and it's way more important what happens when you get up than when you fall down. And it's hard for everybody. Scott Hamilton, I always like to tell this story, who is a famous Olympic skater and commentator and multiple cancer survivor. He was asked a question after he was sort of fired, if you will, from being the lead commentator in the Olympics a few years ago, and he was replaced by 2 much younger skaters. And so they asked him, what do you think about that? How do you feel? And he said, listen, I've been in the Olympics. I've been a professional skater. I've survived cancer 3 times or 4 times. Some incredible number and odds to overcome. He said, but I've fallen down, don't quote me on the number, but it's directional. I've fallen down 41,600 times. And I've gotten up every single time. And that's really how I like to think about it. It's not that it's hard. It is hard. It's hard to fail. It's hard when things don't go the way you want. It's hard when you don't meet your forecast. It's hard when you have a difficult conversation with your investor. It's hard when a product doesn't work the way you want it to. There are thousands of different ways you can fail or just not achieve the results you were hoping to in a business. But the real issue, from my perspective, is what happens after that.
Yeah. And so in that poll, we had a pretty even split between agreeing and disagreeing. Some people felt like 50%, it seemed, well, not 50, but it seemed like an even split, at least between those two, that they bounced back pretty well. And some people felt like it took them a while. But I guess you were talking about mending your bruises. And in the 3 minutes we have left, I'd like to go around the panel and ask each of you how you particularly mend your bruises and like move forward. Is it talking to friends? Is it talking to your partners? Is it just meditating or reflecting? If you want to start, Rachel, and then everyone take about 30 seconds and we can go from there.
So one of the things that I always say is you need to have emotional, physical, financial reserves, and you need to have some way of taking a break. So for me, mine's either exercise or literally mindless 1-hour dramas that either take place in a hospital or a courtroom, or a classic comedy. So, turn on Wedding Crashers at any point in the day. This is not clearly an academic response, but I need something that totally takes my mind off. So it's either laughing or exercising or hanging with friends. But literally, when I need a break, I want my mind to turn off. I want to stop thinking, which is why, when I tried yoga, I could only do hot yoga because when it was hot, all I could think about was how hot it was and nothing else. When it wasn't hot yoga, my mind was still racing. So I need to get to a place where I quiet my mind.
That is 100% me. My guilty pleasure is Grey's Anatomy. All right, Deepak, what about you? What do you do to mend your bruises?
Yeah, so what I would do is basically, I will tell you what I would not do is, what I would not do is blame it on everything else, right? Blame it on the external factors, blame it on your investors, co-founders, everybody else. The key is to take the responsibility and understand that what you are going through, for example, in a startup environment, what you're going in a very small time frame, many people go through their entire career not experiencing what you have done. So look at the brighter side of it, dust yourself up, get up and move on.
Thanks, Deepak. What about you, Greg?
Sorry, taking myself off mute. I want to make a point to highlight the difference between failure, true failure, and fatigue. Sometimes I find that sometimes people think they've failed when they've just really gotten tired. And I think your point about getting something to restore you is really, really vital. One of the most important salves for that wound I have found in my own life is just curiosity. Curiosity, when you have it in the right way, does not exhaust. You have this sort of deep reservoir of a willingness to try and to learn. And when you change your headset to somebody who really wants to find out, that turning the page or sort of finding the next card can be exhilarating, and you don't get tired when you are really open-minded. Yeah. I find that when you really feel like, shit, I'm just going to quit, or I can't do this anymore, it's because you lost the fuel, you lost the curiosity about wanting to get to a certain place. It was so sacrosanct to, the road that you took that it can be very frustrating when the world behaves differently. But curiosity is a really powerful tool. Personally, I like the martial arts, I like chess, I like things that really do take my mind off of it, because if you make a mistake in those kinds of activities, you're done. So something that can be all encompassing, where the implications of your lack of attention and detail have real implications. So I self-select into scenarios like that.
I'm laughing because Greg is playing chess and doing martial arts while I'm, running on the treadmill watching a movie I've seen 700 times.
Right. Yeah. And real quick, Josh, if we have time in 20 seconds.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that when you think about it, that we always ask here at Spark Charge is, for people to always be conscious about their mental toughness, always be conscious about their mental health. When you're putting out fires on a daily basis and you're moving, 1,000 miles per hour at a startup, it's crucial to maintain that and be in control of that. For me personally, I love going for walks. I like walking the dog. But I also, I talk to my fiance a lot too. And it's like, here's everything that happened at work today. And she doesn't work in a startup. So sometimes like her eyes get like this big when she's just like, that happened at a startup. I'm like, oh yeah, that happened at a startup.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. Thank you, everyone.